In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the differences between RAW and JPEG and why shooting RAW should be the first setting you change when you get your new camera. The easiest way for me to explain the difference between RAW and JPEG is this. JPEG is a fully cooked meal, whereas RAW is all of the ingredients to cook the said meal. So JPEG is a compressed, processed version of your image that your camera does internally, whereas RAW is all of the raw information that your camera has collected. JPEG being compressed limits the amount you can push and pull your image, whereas a RAW image allows you to push and pull contrast, exposure, and colors a lot further. Now, because RAW is uncompressed, you will need a RAW converter such as a Adobe Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, Luminar, Capture One, or any other RAW converter on the market. RAW files also take up way more memory than a JPEG file, and it's going to require more computing power from your computer when processing these files. So why should we shoot RAW? Well, first and foremost, it gives you the most data possible when editing an image. It gives you a greater amount of flexibility that a JPEG can never provide you, which allows you to correct issues such as white balance and exposure that you may have messed up when in the field, and also allows you to creatively affect colors and tones in post-production that a JPEG file would just fall apart when trying to attempt. The main reason is a JPEG file is processed internally inside your camera, which limits the amount of shadow and highlight information your camera provides in that file type. A RAW image doesn't have this processing internally inside your camera, which gives you a greater dynamic range of your image. The downside to shooting RAW, though, is you do have to have special software to view the files. You're not going to be able to just pull it out of your SD card and view it on your computer without having a RAW converter like I mentioned before. Now, why would we consider ever shooting JPEG? Well, the main reason is the JPEG files are a lot smaller, and also they don't require special software to view. You could pull the image straight from your camera and load it right onto the internet if you wanted to. Also, because they are compressed, they take up a lot less memory, which will save you hard drive space and also SD card space when out photographing. And lastly, for those of you who are using a cell phone or another camera that cannot shoot RAW, you're gonna have to shoot JPEG anyway. Now, personally, I will always recommend shooting in RAW. And that is because you get the maximum amount of data, which gives you the maximum amount of creative freedom and also gives you the maximum amount of ability to correct issues you may have caused yourself while in the field, such as poor camera settings. I look at it this way. The more data that I can collect in the field to give myself an opportunity to push and pull the image in post-production, that's the style of image or the file type I personally want. The only job our camera has when we're out there is collecting data for us. So if I'm going to limit the amount of data that I'm allowing my device to collect for me, I'm significantly limiting myself as a photographer when I enter the digital Lightroom or post-production process. Now, some things to note when shooting RAW, besides obviously the things we mentioned before, is this. When you get a RAW image onto a computer, it is going to look super washed out, super desaturated, and it's going to look kind of boring and bland. It may not match what you see on the back of your camera screen, and that is because your camera is showing you a JPEG preview of your RAW image. So it is showing you a pre-processed or pre-cooked version of your image on the back of your camera. It's adding saturation and contrast, things that are going to be removed from the file when you do load it onto your computer. So I suggest doing this. Go into your camera settings and find a shooting profile for the given scenario you find yourself in, whether that be landscape or portraits. I will also then go in and crank the contrast and the saturation just in case my client wants a preview of the images we're photographing and I don't want to show them a boring raw image on the back of my camera screen. It also might help you understand what your image might look like on the back of your screen when you're out photographing a scene. By giving you that experience of contrast and saturation, you'll have an understanding of where your settings are landing, or as well as a way you may be able to creatively influence your file at that given moment. Just remember, always make a mental note that the image that you're seeing on the back of your camera, when you get it onto your computer, it is not going to fully match up, and that's because it is raw, which allows you to go make changes to push and pull the contrast and color in a way you would never be able to with a JPEG file. But you got to go in there, you got to start cooking. You got the ingredients, now it's time to start cutting, dicing, cooking, and all that good stuff. Shooting RAW is one of the best ways to separate yourself as a photographer from the rest. The main reason is it allows you the greatest flexibility again in post-processing. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but that is the truth. Capturing an image is only half the battle. Post-processing the image is really where you can separate yourself from the rest. And by giving yourself the maximum amount of information, you're going to set yourself up for success.